Humanity had come a long way since the days of war-ravaged Earth. Centuries of strife, poverty, and stagnation had given way to a new era, one in which humanity was no longer the fragile species at the mercy of every passing threat. They had become an ever-expanding force, setting their roots deep across the stars, stretching their influence from the blue planet that gave birth to them to faraway colonies on distant worlds. Yet despite their rapid technological advances, they were always at the mercy of the Galvok, an ancient and powerful alien empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia. The Galvok were beings of intellect and strength, towering figures of near immortality, whose civilization had long been one of supreme control. They had long considered humanity a trivial curiosity, perhaps a nuisance but never a serious threat. In the grand scheme of the universe, humanity was barely more than an emerging species, still finding its footing in a cosmos that had known far greater powers. But the Galvok had underestimated the resilience of humankind. Their empire stretched across star systems, worlds rich with resources and history. But there was one thing the Galvok didn't anticipate: humanity's ability to play the long game. It had started with whispers, with small incursions into Galvok territory, a few unimportant ships vanishing without a trace, a few messages intercepted, and a few ideas planted. Over time, humanity had grown bold, using their advanced technology to slip past the Galvok's watchful eyes, carving out their own covert network within the empire, an underground resistance, a revolution in the making. Now, humanity stood on the precipice of a monumental shift. They weren't just rebels anymore. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving. And they had something the Galvok didn't: patience. The protagonist of this struggle, Captain Elena Corbin, stood at the helm of the Sovereign Dawn, one of humanity's most advanced warships. A masterpiece of design, it was far more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of human ingenuity. Within its walls, every inch of space had been repurposed, every tool, weapon, and system designed to maximize efficiency, to take on the seemingly insurmountable task of toppling an empire. The ship's sensors hummed quietly in the background as Elena paced across the command deck. Her eyes flickered over the readouts, the maps of Galvok space, the calculated risk of their latest move. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and dread. They had done it. They had found the crack in the Galvok's armor. A single, vulnerable sector of the empire, a source of power, a key that, if turned, could bring it all crashing down. But Elena knew that victory would never come without sacrifice, and the stakes had never been higher. Her thoughts drifted to her crew. Each of them had their own story, their own reasons for fighting. They weren't soldiers by nature, but they had become warriors out of necessity. Some were former civilians. Others were exiles from Galvok-occupied worlds, driven by a deep thirst for revenge. But all shared a singular belief: humanity had been underestimated, and now was their time to prove the galaxy wrong. The command center was alive with chatter, the quiet hum of energy building, each moment bringing them closer to their goal. Elena's first officer, Arik Danton, a man of few words and even fewer doubts, stood at the communications console, his gaze fixed on the encrypted transmission he was receiving. Elena approached him, sensing the tension in the air. "Anything?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with anticipation. Danton glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. "We've intercepted a Galvok communications relay. It's encrypted, but it's not a priority message. It's a routine update, one we can exploit. If we reroute our course through the Obsidian Belt, we can use the relay as a backdoor to access their fleet's central database." Elena nodded. It was a risky move, but it was the kind of risk they had grown used to taking. A backdoor to Galvok intelligence could provide everything they needed to destabilize the Empire. They would learn where the vulnerabilities were, who the sympathizers were, and how deep the cracks in the Galvok Foundation ran. But there was one thing Elena couldn't shake, a feeling deep in her gut that told her something was off. The Galvok were not stupid. This kind of opportunity wouldn't be left open for long, and yet here they were on the verge of seizing it. "How long?" she asked. her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. 4 hours, maybe less, Danton replied. We'll need to cut through the belt faster than we've ever done before. Elena's eyes narrowed. The Obsidian Belt was a treacherous region, a field of asteroids and radiation. Piloting through it was a feat even the most experienced navigators hesitated to attempt. But there was no choice. If they missed this window, it might be another 100 years before humanity found another opportunity like this one. Do it, she said, her tone final. Prepare the crew. As Danton relayed the orders, Elena turned to face the vast expanse of stars through the viewport. The unknown loomed before them, infinite and full of potential. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity was ready to take its place in the galaxy. Whether the Galvok realized it or not, the long game was over. It was time to make the Empire feel the weight of their arrogance. But as the Sovereign Dawn entered the belt, Elena couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. Something in the shadows, just beyond their grasp, was watching. Waiting. As the ship cut through the swirling field of debris, Elena's mind raced. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Not now. Not when victory was so close. The ship hurtled deeper into the Obsidian Belt, dodging massive asteroids, and navigating through pockets of radiation that flared brightly, casting the hull of the Sovereign Dawn in a sickly green light. Every sensor on the ship screamed warnings, but Elena and her crew were masters of this kind of chaos. Yet, as they neared the designated point where the relay signal was strongest, something caught Elena's attention. A shift in the energy signature they had been tracking. It wasn't normal. She stood up abruptly, her gaze fixed on the screens. Danton, she called. Something's off. Check the signal again. The first officer looked up from his console, brow furrowed. He double-checked the readings, his face paling. Captain, the signal. It's not a relay. It's a trap. The realization hit her. Like a slap, the Galvok had anticipated their move. They had been lured in. Brace for impact, Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the comms, filled with urgency. The ship jolted violently as a massive energy wave swept across their path, sending the Sovereign Dawn into a tailspin. The energy wave had done more than just rattle the ship. It had disabled their primary systems. Lights flickered, and alarms blared across the command deck. Damage report, Elena demanded, her heart pounding. We've lost engine power and shields, Danton responded, struggling to regain control. The relay was a diversion. The real threat? It's coming. Out of the debris, something massive emerged. A Galvok warship, far larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever encountered. The Sovereign Dawn was outclassed, outgunned, and out of time. Elena's mind raced. This was no mere skirmish. This was a fight for their very survival. As the Galvok warship loomed closer, Elena made a decision. She turned to Danton, her eyes cold with resolve. Prepare the quantum disruptor. We're not running. We're taking this fight to them. The crew scrambled, each member knowing their part. In the silence of space, the Sovereign Dawn stood as humanity's last bastion, its crew ready to make their stand against the empire that had once believed them inconsequential. The fight for the galaxy had just begun, and humanity wasn't going to back down now. The Sovereign Dawn drifted through the void of the Obsidian Belt, its hull vibrating as it sliced through a field of asteroids, each one larger than a city block, spinning wildly in unpredictable orbits. The sleek, formidable ship, though a marvel of human engineering, felt small in the face of the immense and chaotic expanse that surrounded it. The constant hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the command deck, a sharp contrast to the tense silence that had descended on the crew. Captain Elena Corbin stood at the heart of it all, her eyes fixed on the glowing green holographic map that hovered before her. The energy signature from the Galvok communications relay was growing stronger, pulsing like a distant heartbeat. It was close, too close perhaps, but it was their best shot at destabilizing the empire from the inside. Humanity had spent decades cultivating intelligence, preparing for this very moment. Every move had been meticulously calculated. They couldn't afford to miss it. The ship's crew, hardened by years of rebellion and war, worked in practiced silence, each one aware of their role in this high-stakes operation. Elena's mind was sharp, focused, but there was something gnawing at her. A suspicion, a subtle feeling that the universe was about to remind them just how small they were in the grand scheme of things. ETA to relay, 20 minutes. Danton's voice broke through the tension, calm and professional as ever. The first officer's face remained expressionless as he studied the readouts. "Captain, the coordinates are locked. We're on course." "Good," Elena replied, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. This was it, the culmination of years of covert operations, false flag operations, and subterfuge. They were on the brink of achieving the impossible, undermining the Galvok Empire from within, a feat no one, not even the most optimistic human minds, had dared to believe was possible. But as she scanned the stars, the gut feeling that something was wrong grew stronger. The Galvok had never been sloppy. They were ancient, intelligent, and ruthless. This seemingly harmless relay could very well be a baited trap. Elena had seen how they operated before. False hopes to lure the enemy into a false sense of security, only to unleash annihilation when it mattered most. "Captain," Danton said again, his voice tinged with unease. "The energy signature's fluctuating. It's irregular." Elena snapped her gaze to him. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's not a standard relay," Danton said, his fingers flying across the console. "It's a signal, but the emissions are mixed with strange frequencies. Code, encrypted in a way we haven't seen before." Elena felt her stomach drop. The Galvok were known for their high-level encryption, but they didn't normally mix their signals in this way. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just a transmission, it was something far more dangerous. "We have a clear shot at it?" Elena asked, trying to suppress the growing unease in her chest. If this was a trap, they needed to abort the mission before it was too late. "Not yet," Danton replied, eyes narrowing. "But we can hack it. We'll need to deploy a probe to interface with the relay. If we get through, we can access the Galvok fleet's central database." "Do it. Full speed ahead." The ship accelerated, dodging asteroids in its path as it moved closer to the relay. Elena's hands tightened around the edge of her console. The crew was ready, but the air felt thick with the weight of impending danger. As the Sovereign Dawn neared the relay's coordinates, Elena's eyes flicked to the display again, scanning the real-time data. The ship's shields flickered, a momentary disruption. Her breath caught, but Danton was already on it. "Shields are stable," he said, his voice taut. "But there's something out there, some kind of anomaly. Energy signatures unidentifiable." Elena's fingers drummed against her chair. The anomaly was too close now. There was no going back. And then it happened. Without warning, the relay burst to life, sending a pulse of energy that surged through the void. It wasn't just a signal, it was a weapon. The pulse hit the Sovereign Dawn with a force that rattled the ship to its core. The deck shook violently as alarms screamed through the command center, lights flickering. "What the hell was that?" Elena shouted, gripping the armrests of her chair as the ship lurched. "EMP wave," Danton called, his voice tight. "Systems are overloaded. We've lost primary and secondary power." The ship's once smooth motion came to a sudden grinding halt as the engine sputtered and died. The hum of energy that had once powered the Sovereign Dawn went silent, leaving only the cold sound of metal creaking as the ship slowly drifted. "No. No, no," Elena hissed, eyes darting to the flickering console. The emergency lights cast eerie shadows over the control deck. "How bad is it?" "We've lost control," Danton muttered, his hands scrambling to reboot the system. "Hull integrity is intact, but we're dead in space." Elena slammed her fist on the console, but her mind was already racing. This was no accidental interference. The Galvok had set them up. This wasn't a simple relay, it had been a trap all along. A trap designed to disable them. "We're not dead yet," Elena said through gritted teeth. "Danton, bring the auxiliary power online. Anything we can do to stay on course." But before he could respond, the ship trembled again. This time it wasn't from their own malfunction. It was a new force, one far more menacing. From the shadow of a nearby asteroid field, another ship emerged. Larger than any human vessel, its sleek, alien design stretched across the space in front of them like a looming predator. A Galvok warship, colossal and imposing, with weapon systems primed and targeting sensors glowing red. "Elena," Danton's voice faltered. "That's not just any warship. That's their flagship, the Abyssal Dawn. We've walked right into their kill zone." Elena's mind spun. They were trapped. The trap had worked. They had been lured in by the very bait they had set for the Galvok, only to find themselves staring down the might of the empire they had dared to challenge. The cold, vast emptiness of space. The Sovereign Dawn was now a helpless moth, caught in the ravenous jaws of the beast, and humanity's carefully orchestrated game had just reached its most dangerous point yet. The Abyssal Dawn loomed closer, its massive bulk blocking out the stars behind it. Elena watched as the massive ship's weapon systems powered up. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was the Galvok announcing their presence with force. The Sovereign Dawn was sitting in the middle of a cosmic firing range, its systems barely holding together, its crew at the mercy of an empire that had thought humanity nothing more than an insignificant annoyance. "We're sitting ducks," Danton muttered. "Hey," his fingers still tapping frantically at the console, trying to reroute power to the engines. "No shields, no weapons if they fire." "I know," Elena cut him off, her voice steady despite the chaos. She wasn't going to let the Galvok take them without a fight. "I want all hands on deck. We're going to make them regret underestimating us." She turned to the crew, her eyes steely with determination. "Prepare the quantum disruptor. We're not dying today. Whatever it takes, we fight." Danton nodded grimly. "Aye, Captain." The crew, each of them struggling with the mounting pressure, moved swiftly to their stations. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as the seconds stretched into eternity. The Abyssal Dawn was a force to be reckoned with, but the Sovereign Dawn was humanity's last hope. They had come too far to falter now. The ship's weapon systems flickered back to life. A low hum filled the air as the quantum disruptor powered up. Elena's hands gripped the armrests of her chair again. It was do or die. A loud crack echoed through the ship as the first salvo from the Galvok warship struck. The entire vessel lurched again, but the crew held their breath, waiting. "Fire everything," Elena ordered. The quiet intensity of her command rang out through the deck, and then, in the vast darkness of space, the battle began. The Sovereign Dawn trembled under the second barrage of the Galvok flagship's weapons. The ship's hull groaned as the energy pulses crashed against its weakened shields. Elena could feel the vibrations reverberate through the floor beneath her feet, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. The crew looked to her now for leadership, and her every decision carried the weight of their survival. "Status report," she barked, her voice sharp but steady, cutting through the chaos. The command deck was alive with activity, engineers and officers rushing to their stations, emergency lights flashing in rhythmic pulses. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, the acrid scent of burning circuitry. "We've lost one of the forward stabilizers," Danton responded quickly, his fingers flying over his console. "Auxiliary power's online, but barely. Shields are down to 20%, and we're venting atmosphere in sections 3 and 4. The quantum disruptor's ready, but it's going to be a one-shot deal. If we fire now, we won't have enough energy to get out of here." Elena's eyes narrowed. She weighed the options in her mind, each one more dangerous than the last. There was no way out of this unless they got creative. She'd learned long ago that humanity thrived on its ability to improvise, to think outside the box when the odds were stacked against them. The Sovereign Dawn was the embodiment of that spirit, an imperfect vessel built on ingenuity and stubbornness. "Lock onto the Abyssal Dawn's power core. We'll hit it with everything we've got." Danton hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Aye, Captain." Firing solution locked. The crew scrambled to execute her orders, their movements sharp, practiced, born from years of working under pressure. Elena's heart pounded as she watched the distant, imposing form of the Galvok flagship grow ever larger in the viewport. It loomed like a beast ready to swallow them whole. The Sovereign Dawn's quantum disruptor, their last hope, was their only chance to take it down. "Captain?" Danton called again, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "If we miss, we won't have time to reload. The Abyssal Dawn is already preparing another strike." Elena didn't hesitate. "We don't miss." The command was simple, but its weight hung heavy in the air. Every person aboard the Sovereign Dawn knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a test of everything they had fought for. For years, humanity had been underestimated, mocked as primitive, incapable of standing against the might of the Galvok Empire. This was their chance to prove that the Galvok had been wrong. This was their chance to show the galaxy that humanity would not be erased. A brilliant flash of light erupted from the Sovereign Dawn as the quantum disruptor discharged. The pulse of energy streaked through the black void, cutting through the darkness like a jagged blade. Time seemed to slow, the ship holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion that would follow. For a moment, the Sovereign Dawn seemed to hang in the balance. Then, the impact hit. The Abyssal Dawn shuddered, violently, its entire frame lighting up with a cascade of explosions as the pulse of energy struck its power core. "Direct hit!" Danton shouted. "We've crippled their engines. They're losing power fast." Elena felt a surge of triumph, but the victory was short-lived. The Abyssal Dawn might be wounded, but it wasn't down yet. The Galvok flagship's weapons, systems were still operational, and it wasn't going to take long for them to retaliate. Before Elena could give another order, the enemy ship fired. The deadly energy blast sliced through the darkness, and the Sovereign Dawn was rocked again, this time harder than before. Sparks flew from the overhead panels as the ship shuddered violently. The artificial gravity flickered, and Elena's stomach lurched as the deck tilted under her feet. She grabbed the edge of her console to steady herself, eyes wide. "We've lost secondary power." Danton's voice came through, panic rising in his usually calm tone. "The disruptors drained our reserves. We're on auxiliary power and it won't hold for long." Elena's mind raced. The Sovereign Dawn was a sitting target. Their one shot had worked, but the Abyssal Dawn was not going to let them escape. They needed to move. They needed to... "Captain!" A voice shouted from the back of the command deck. Elena turned, her heart stopping. Lieutenant Marlowe, the ship's lead strategist, was holding up a glowing data pad. "I've got something," Marlowe said, eyes wild with excitement. "An encrypted signal coming from the flagship. It's not an attack command, it's a distress signal, I think." He paused, glancing nervously at Danton. "I think it's a trap." Elena's brows furrowed. "A trap?" Marlowe nodded. "They're sending us a false signal trying to get us to board them. It's a decoy. If we go in close enough, they'll ambush us. They're drawing us in." A cold dread settled in Elena's stomach. The Galvok weren't just trying to destroy them, they were toying with them. They were using their own desperation against them. "We're not going to fall for it," Elena said, her voice suddenly ice cold. "Prepare to break away from the flagship. Get us out of this kill zone. If we survive this, we'll deal with the trap later." But before Danton could respond, the lights flickered again. The Sovereign Dawn lurched violently to the side as a massive force hit them from behind. The ship had been struck by a missile barrage. The rear engines went up in flames, and the ship was sent spiraling into an uncontrollable spin. Elena's breath caught in her throat as alarms blared and the crew scrambled to stay on course. The Sovereign Dawn's control systems were now completely offline, and the ship was at the mercy of the Galvok flagship's relentless assault. "Elena, we're going to crash," Danton shouted over the noise, his hands desperately trying to regain control of the ship's failing systems. "Brace for impact," Elena yelled. Her mind was a blur of thoughts, but there was one thing that cut through all the noise. They had to fight back. They had to survive, no matter the cost. The Sovereign Dawn spiraled through the field of debris, its trajectory wildly unpredictable. Elena fought to keep her focus. The ship groaned under the pressure, every inch of its body screaming as it fought to stay intact. There was no easy way out of this mess. They were caught between the flagship and the void. No shields, no engines, and a ship that was falling apart around them. And then, just as she thought it was over, a spark of brilliance hit her. The escape pods, Elena muttered under her breath, turning toward Danton. We can launch the pods. Get the crew to safety while we make our last stand. We can't save the ship, but we can save the people. Danton's eyes widened in realization. Captain, you're right. The pods are still functional. But the Abyssal, Dawn will try to track them. It'll be a slaughter. We won't give them the satisfaction, Elena said, her voice full of fire. Everyone abandon ship. We fight for the future. If we can't win today, we make sure the Abyssal Dawn remembers us. Suspense and emotion. As the ship careened toward the edge of the battle, Elena's eyes flickered with something unexpected, a sense of hope, a renewed fire in her heart. The Sovereign Dawn was down, but humanity wasn't. This was the way. They fought in the face of overwhelming odds. With everything on the line, they never gave up. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something more, for the future, for the legacy they would leave behind. With a final, defiant roar, the Sovereign Dawn broke free from its spiraling trajectory, and the escape pods launched in rapid succession, streaking into the void. But one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. The void outside the Sovereign Dawn was eerily quiet after the storm of violence had passed. The crew, scattered across escape pods, watched as their ship, the last symbol of humanity's fight for freedom, drifted lifelessly into space, a fireball of twisted metal and shattered hope. But Elena wasn't ready to give up, not yet. The Sovereign Dawn might be destroyed, but humanity was still out there, still standing. Inside one of the escape pods, Elena gripped the cold metal, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her heart hammered in her chest. She hadn't thought this would be how it ended, floating in the emptiness of space, watching the last remnants of their rebellion burn in front of her. But that feeling of hopelessness was fleeting. Humanity had made it this far. They would adapt. They would survive. Report, Elena snapped, though she could barely hear herself over the hum of the escape pod's engines. Danton, sitting across from her, was fiddling with the comms. His usual composure had cracked, but there was still determination in his eyes. We've got contact with the other pods. Some of the crew are already setting up emergency beacons. The Galvok flagship is still out there, but their systems are down. They're limping, trying to re-establish power. It's only a matter of time before they come after us, Elena finished for him. The Abyssal Dawn wasn't just limping, it was hunting them. They had one advantage. The Galvok flagship was badly damaged, and its ability to track and hunt down the pods was crippled. But it was still a massive, terrifying war machine, and their time was running out. We need to fight back, Elena said, her voice low, but full of fire. We can't just run. We have to make them pay for what they've done. Danton's eyes met hers. You know what you're suggesting? The Abyssal Dawn is a juggernaut. Even if we get a transmission out to the other pods, we don't have enough resources to build a force strong enough to engage them. We're outgunned and outmanned. There's always a way, Elena replied, her voice hardening with resolve. We can't let them think they've won. She looked out the viewport of the escape pod, her gaze fixed on the distant Abyssal Dawn. The flagship was no longer just a symbol of the Galvok's dominance. It had become a symbol of their hubris. A single warship, beaten, broken, but still intact. It was a force of destruction. But beneath that cold, impenetrable exterior was a weakness. There had to be a way to exploit it. Get me into their system, Elena said, her voice firm. We've fought this hard. We aren't running now. Danton hesitated, but then nodded, pulling up a series of encrypted signals on his console. I can try to tap into their communications, but if I can't find the back door, we're done. No more tricks. Elena looked down at her hands, still trembling from the near-death experiences they had just faced. She could feel the weight of her decision in her bones. There was no turning back now. If this didn't work, they were as good as dead. If the Galvok finished what they started, they'd wipe out humanity and anything that stood in their way. She trusted Danton. They had been through hell together, but this time, trust was only the beginning. The seconds dragged on as Danton typed furiously into the system, his brow furrowed with concentration. The escape pod was too small, too fragile, but it felt like it was the only thing standing between humanity and annihilation. "Captain," Danton said, voice tight with effort, "I found something. A secondary control access point on the flagship. It's weak, damaged from the last attack. I think I can use it to override their systems, but I'll need to hack into their mainframe manually. We'll need to get close, enough to bypass their external defenses." Elena nodded, her mind racing. "How close?" "Close enough that the Abyssal Dawn will see us as an immediate threat," Danton replied. "But not close enough to guarantee we won't get vaporized. It'll be a hell of a shot." Elena's heart pounded. The gamble they were about to take would either level the playing field or seal their fate. There was no middle ground. "Prepare. The crew," Elena said, her voice full of purpose. "We need to buy time and draw their fire. We're going after their core. This is the only chance we have left." The escape pod's systems hummed to life as Elena ordered the crew to rendezvous at the same location. One by one, their small pods converged, gliding silently through the void. As they approached the Abyssal Dawn, the vast warship loomed ever closer, its immense silhouette blocking out the stars. Elena watched it grow, the memories of their struggles flashing in her mind. Every death, every loss, every sacrifice had led them here. They wouldn't let it be in vain, but as they neared the enemy flagship, something unexpected happened. The ship's weapon systems remained quiet. It didn't fire. They were too close now for the Galvok to ignore them, and yet there was no retaliation. Elena's pulse quickened. "What's happening?" she whispered, more to herself than to Danton. Danton stared at the screen in disbelief. It's not reacting to us. The flagship's defensive systems are still down. It's not tracking us anymore." "Why?" Elena's mind raced. The Galvok weren't known for their mercy. They didn't just leave things to chance. "What's the catch?" Before she could finish her thought, the answer revealed itself. A deep, guttural voice crackled over the comms, distorting the airwaves. "Humans," it growled. "You think you've won. You think you've outsmarted us, but you haven't." The voice sent a chill down Elena's spine. "The Abyssal Dawn is no longer your enemy," it continued, its tone dripping with mockery. "Your rebellion, your war, it ends here. You've triggered something you do not understand. This is no longer about battle. It's about something far worse." A sudden rumble shook the pod as a bright light flared from the heart of the Abyssal Dawn. For a moment, Elena thought the entire ship was about to explode, but it wasn't an explosion. It was a pulse. An energy wave, unlike anything they had seen before, rippling outward, casting shadows across the stars. Elena's thoughts raced as she realized the truth. This was never just a war, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. This was a test, and we're the experiment. A horrifying realization washed over her. The Galvok weren't just fighting humanity, they were manipulating them. The Abyssal Dawn had been rigged to trigger something far more dangerous. A weapon, yes, but not just any weapon. It was a weapon of control, of domination, and the humans had unknowingly walked right into its trap. But that wouldn't stop them. It couldn't. Danton, override their systems. Now! Danton's fingers flew across his console, and for a split second the ship shook again. But this time, it was a different kind of tremor. It was the pulse of a new beginning. The Sovereign Dawn's crew had no illusions about what they were facing, but as the truth of the Galvok's manipulations came to light, it fueled their resolve. They wouldn't just fight for survival anymore. They were fighting for freedom, for humanity. The light from the Abyssal Dawn's core began to fade, but not in the way Elena had hoped. Despite their best efforts, the flagship's true weapon had been unleashed, and its ripple effect had sent waves of energy across the galaxy, an energy designed to fracture civilizations, to bend them to the will of the Galvok. It was a terrifying, insidious force, one that could dismantle the very fabric of what humanity had fought for. Elena's mind raced. The last gambit, the one where they fought back with every ounce of ingenuity and defiance, had worked in part. They'd taken down the flagship's external systems, but it had come at a price. The Galvok Empire had never intended to let the humans win. They had designed their war to ensure that if humanity even had a chance at victory, it would be hollow. As the last remnants of the Sovereign Dawn drifted into the distance, Elena thought, back to the crew. Each person aboard that ship had given their all. Their blood, their sweat, their sacrifices. They weren't just defending a ship. They were defending the future of humanity. A future now uncertain, but one that still burned, with the fire of hope. But that hope had taken a blow. The Abyssal Dawn had no longer been just a flagship. It had become a harbinger, the signal that their war was part of a much larger cosmic game. "We've won battles, but the war is far from over," Elena muttered as she gazed into the fading stars. "We've only just begun." Danton's voice broke her thoughts. "Captain, you're right. The Abyssal Dawn may be gone, but the Galvok's true weapon is still active. It won't be long before we see the ripple effects. We've crippled them for now, but they're not done." The reality of their situation pressed down on Elena's chest, like an anchor pulling her deeper into the void. They were running out of time to find a way to undo the damage, time to rally their people, time to stop the Galvok from manipulating every civilization they encountered. As the escape pods continued to rendezvous in the blackness of space, Elena turned to the crew that remained with her. They were all battered, weary, their faces etched with the pain of the battles they'd fought and the ones still to come. The path ahead was clouded in uncertainty, but one thing was clear. Humanity had made it this far, and they wouldn't bow down now. "We're going to need more than just a fight to take this back," Elena said, her voice low but steady. "We need alliances. We need to work with those we've been at odds with, whether they're alien species or rebels we've never heard of. The Galvok might control more than we thought, but they can't control everything. This fight isn't just ours anymore, it's universal." Marlowe, still staring at the damaged screens of his escape pod, nodded. "We're not alone, Captain. The humans in the outer colonies have already started to mobilize. We'll reach out to them, to everyone we can. There's still a chance for us to turn this around." The words felt like a lifeline. It wasn't just hope, it was a plan. A fragile one, yes, but a plan nonetheless. Humanity had always been at its best when fighting against the impossible odds. They would need every ally, every ounce of their strength and every bit of courage they had left. But they had something the Galvok couldn't understand, something that was unique to humanity. They had resilience. They had ingenuity. And more than that, they had the will to fight, no matter odds, no matter the enemy, and that would be their weapon. Over the course of the next few weeks, the crew of the Sovereign Dawn began to make contact with survivors, sending distress signals to humanity's allies scattered across the galaxy. Slowly, word spread. First, the outer colonies responded, sending ships to rendezvous with the survivors. Then came the distant worlds, those that had once been too far removed from the conflict but now found themselves drawn into the gravity of the war. But just as Elena had feared, the Galvok's weapon was far-reaching. Entire fleets of ships, both human and alien, had felt the shockwave, their communication systems jammed or their leaders falling into a kind of subtle subjugation. The ripple effect wasn't just physical, it was psychological, manipulating the thoughts of commanders and leaders, bending them toward apathy or fear. Humanity wasn't fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting for their very agency, for the right to choose their own destiny. "We've got a message from the Zorvath," Danton said, breaking into Elena's thoughts. The Zorvath were a race that had once been enemies to humanity, but after years of uneasy peace, they had aligned themselves with the resistance. It seemed they were finally ready to join the cause. "Let's hear it," Elena replied, her voice steady, but the weight of what came next settled heavily on her. The transmission was brief, but the words were clear. "We stand with you, humans. The Abyssal Dawn may have fallen, but we have not forgotten. Together we will tear down the Galvok Empire." The message, as short as it was, felt like a beacon of hope. The Zorvath weren't the only ones watching either. Across the galaxy, different species, previously neutral or on the edge of the conflict, were beginning to question the Galvok's motives, wondering if the once feared empire had become a corrupted force bent on domination. With each new message of support, the small group of survivors aboard the escape pods, now forming a new fleet, felt the tide slowly shifting. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was the first step toward something larger, the restoration of balance. As the fleet began to regroup, Elena stood at the helm of the new command ship. The stars outside were distant and cold, but they no longer felt so oppressive. The weight of the universe was still there, but humanity had a chance to reshape it. They had a chance to fight back, not just for survival, but for the right to decide their future. "Captain," Danton said, his voice quiet, but full of conviction. "It's happening. The resistance is growing. We've started making headway on the inside. The Galvok's control is slipping." Elena's gaze lingered on the stars outside for a moment longer. They weren't just pinpricks of light in the dark. They were symbols of every struggle, every victory, and every life that had come before. "It's not over yet," she said softly, a determined fire burning in her eyes. "But this time, we're not just fighting for our survival. We're fighting for the freedom of everyone." A wave of resolution swept through her. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before. They thought they could break them, erase them. But they had been wrong. Now, the fight would continue, but this time, humanity would no longer be just a footnote in the history of the galaxy. They would be its reckoning. The fleet continued its silent journey through the cold, endless black, the stars offering no answers, only distant possibilities. The damage to the Sovereign Dawn was irreparable, but the spark that had fueled its crew, humanity's relentless defiance, was still alive. It burned within every ship in their makeshift fleet, a beacon that refused to fade. Elena stood at the helm of the Phoenix Reborn, their new flagship, a symbol of humanity's unwillingness. To submit, she had not wanted this. She hadn't wanted to lead another campaign, to fight yet another war against an empire that would not rest until every corner of the galaxy had bent to its will. But that was the reality now. This wasn't just about humanity's survival. It was about the survival of all those who stood in the Galvok's shadow. "Captain," Danton said, his voice filled with a strange mixture of awe and dread, "we've received another transmission. It's not from the Galvok. This time it's something else." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had expected the usual messages from their allies or distress calls from other colonies. But this was something new. "Patch it through," Elena ordered, her mind racing. What else could this be? Had they uncovered another piece of the Galvok's true intentions, or was it something far more dangerous? The transmission crackled to life, the voice unmistakable. It wasn't human. The language was unfamiliar, its cadence chilling. But through the static, one word stood out. "Awaken." A cold shiver ran down Elena's spine. She hadn't just heard that word, she felt it, as if it echoed deep within her mind, reverberating through her very bones. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice tight with the weight of that word. "I'm not sure," Danton replied, his face pale. "But the signal, it's originating from the same quadrant, where we detected that ancient signal a few weeks ago." Elena turned toward the star chart displayed on the console. The quadrant was deep in uncharted space, far from any known systems, untouched by either the Galvok or humanity's expansion. It was a place long thought to be beyond reach, shrouded in cosmic dust and strange anomalies. But that wasn't what troubled her. It was the fact that the signal had come in such a form, distinct, purposeful, and old. Older than anything they had encountered, possibly older than the Galvok themselves. The crew around her was tense, their eyes flickering toward her for direction. No one spoke, but the unspoken question was clear. Was this a trap? Was this a trap they couldn't afford to ignore? "We can't let it go uninvestigated," Elena said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of authority that came with the responsibility of leading this fragmented fleet. "Prepare the fleet," Set course for the quadrant. As the order was relayed, Elena leaned forward, her fingers tracing the edges of the star map. Her mind raced. This signal, this awaken, it had to mean something. It wasn't just a plea for help. It was a summons. And with humanity at the brink, they couldn't afford to ignore whatever this was. Whether it was a weapon, an ally, or a threat beyond the Galvok's understanding, they had to know. The stars outside the viewport blurred as the fleet shifted course, moving deeper into the unknown. The crew continued with their preparations, but there was a collective feeling in the air: tension, curiosity, fear. Humanity had just survived the fight for their freedom, but now they were stepping into something much larger, something that could change everything. Minutes turned to hours, and as the fleet approached the coordinates, the vast emptiness of space began to shift. A strange energy pulsed from ahead, unseen but undeniable, like a dark heartbeat in the cosmos. It wasn't just the signal. It was something in the very fabric of space, something that had been dormant, waiting. "We're approaching the source," Danton announced, his voice grim. "The energy readings are off the charts. I've never seen anything like this." Elena's jaw tightened. She had felt it too. A growing sense of wrongness, as if the universe itself was about to reveal a truth that no one was prepared for. "Helm, hold steady," Elena commanded. "We can't afford to make any mistakes now." The fleet slowed, entering the anomaly with caution. The Phoenix Reborn led the way, its engines humming as they neared the heart of the signal. Then suddenly the space around them seemed to shimmer, as if the very laws of physics were bending. The stars outside twisted and contorted, stretching into strange, unfamiliar shapes. And then the truth came into view. A massive structure, ancient and colossal, drifted before them, a fortress the size of a moon. Its design was unlike anything humanity or the Galvok had ever encountered. Towers spiraled upwards like twisted spires, their surfaces smooth and dark, reflecting the emptiness of space around them. It looked like it had been here for eons, buried beneath layers of cosmic dust and time. "Elena," Danton's voice broke through her stunned silence. "I don't know what this is, but we're not the first to find it." A chilling thought gripped her. Who else had discovered this place? The Galvok? No, they would have claimed it long ago. Whoever, or whatever, had left this behind, it had been hidden, waiting. But for what purpose? "We need to approach with extreme caution," Elena said, voice low, almost reverent. "This may be the key to everything, or it could be the end of us." The fleet moved closer, entering the shadow of the ancient structure. As they approached, the signal grew stronger, the resonance of its call pulsing through the air like a song from the stars themselves. Then, with an eerie certainty, the voice returned. "Awaken." This time it was clearer, louder, almost as if it was speaking directly to Elena. "We're not alone," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Not by a long shot. The revelation of the ancient structure, the voice beckoning them deeper into uncharted space, and the overwhelming sense of a larger power at play set the stage for an uncertain future. Humanity had fought to survive against the Galvok, but now they were facing something far older, far more enigmatic, and potentially far more dangerous. Was this the weapon humanity had been searching for? Or had they stumbled into the lair of an ancient civilization whose power had far surpassed anything the Galvok had ever dreamed of? As the fleet prepared to explore the unknown depths of this ancient fortress, one thing was certain. The fight for humanity's place in the galaxy was FI. Was this the weapon humanity had been searching for? Or had they stumbled into the lair of an ancient civilization whose power had far surpassed anything the Galvok had ever dreamed of? As the fleet prepared to explore the unknown depths of this ancient fortress, one thing was certain. The fight for humanity's place in the galaxy was far from over. But now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about discovering the truth behind the signal and unlocking the power hidden in the forgotten corners of space. And whatever they found, humanity would face it head-on, with all the courage, ingenuity, and determination that had gotten them this far.